Risk existed in the collapsing space between lips, just before a kiss, and the banks of the Mischief River were a cemetery to all that the currents no longer wanted. Oncoming fireworks exploded through the chill autumnal air, like chants in the tongue of thunder. Violent rainbows that looked at the heavens but stank of sulfur. Crackling light reflected across cold, black waters, and fireworks exploded. People from the little city of October, Illinois, gathered here at the end of every September, as did the casual monsters and the invisible ghosts, and so did the great beast, unseen, who patrolled black waters. Here they gathered, but their ceremonies were not the same. And the beast was not greedy. Only a few would be chosen. Fireworks exploded.
This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite horrors, and share original spooky stories. I'm Jeff C. Carter, and this week we're talking with Nicholas Day about his new book, October Animals. Nicholas Day is an award-nominated author of horror, sci-fi, and crime fiction. He co-owns Rooster Republic Press and its imprint, Strange House Books, with Don Noble, and he oversees art and acquisitions for Journal Stone's imprint, Bizarro Pulp Press. He lives in northern Illinois with his family, where he is always working on new material. You can find more at nicholasdayonline.com. Welcome to the show, Nick. What would Pennywise say to successfully lure you into the sewer?
Oh man, there is not a thing that a clown could say to lure me into a sewer, unfortunately.
Wow. Your dislike of discrimination, I should say, against clowns is more powerful.
Sewer dwellers in general, I'm going to side-eye pretty hard, especially if they're trying to get me to come down there. I'm just going to readily assume that they're going to try to eat me or take my soul or something.
So you're saying a chud would have to play hard to get?
It'd have to be one hell of a chud. It'd have to be more like the female gremlin from Gremlins 2.
Okay. So sort of a Bugs Bunny with a
Sure.
lipstick. All right. I will spread that to my network of chuds.
Yes. Even as a little kid, I would have run terrified out of my mind from a clown in a sewer.
I think Stephen King was writing, as he often does, from a gentler time when the prospect of getting a balloon was so exciting.
From a sewer clown.
From a sewer clown.
And there's cotton candy and rides and all sorts of surprises down here. And balloons, too.
Now kids would be like, I'm not getting off the couch unless you're paying me in crypto. In the intro, we mentioned a few fun facts, like the fact that you live in Illinois and you write horror, sci-fi, and crime fiction. Did you grow up in Illinois?
I was born in Southern Illinois. Lived there for a number of years. I did live out in Charlottesville, Virginia for a period of time, but I've also lived out on the West Coast for a number of years. I spent about a decade or so out there, and I have only recently relocated to Northern Illinois.
Where on the West Coast were you?
I lived in Los Angeles, Hollywood, California for a while, and I also lived in Southern Oregon.
So you're hitting all the biomes.
I'm trying to. I'd like to live in all the climates. My bucket list is just, that's it.
Were you always into horror, sci-fi, crime fiction? Was there one that was a gateway to the others?
I'm afraid my exposure to horror is probably pretty by rote at this point for a lot of people. My mom had some Stephen King lying around. Stephen King's The Boogeyman, I think that was the first probably horror short story that really hit a nerve. The other one, it's in an old Alfred Hitchcock collection. I think I have it sitting here. Let me grab it. Alfred Hitchcock's Ghostly Gallery. I also never throw anything away, so I have books like from when I was probably 4 and 5 years old.
I've got my copy of Alfred Hitchcock's Monster Museum on my shelf over there.
The story in here, A.M. Barrage, The Waxwork. And that was just a creepy, weirdo story, even when I was a kid. Those were probably like my earliest literary forays into horror.
Side bag, have you seen the trailer for Boogeyman?
I have. Sure is a trailer for a movie.
It has a familiar rhythm.
More power to them. You know, I've worked in film and TV for a while, and I know what it's like to have to work doing that stuff. And I have no ill will towards anybody that ever wants to make a movie or a TV show. It is a thankless, hard job. That said, does that trailer look like that short story? No, not at all. Doesn't look like it at all, with the exception of
There being a therapist.
a therapist. And but look how many short stories Stephen King wrote that fit that bill, right? Graveyard Shift. That's another one that's based on a short story. It's really nothing like it at all.
I think Lawnmower Man has got to be the all-time distance on adaptation.
Yeah, they just lifted a title in the name and put it on a virtual reality thriller.
You know, Cybo Man, if you want, you could call me Lawnmower Man.
Based on this early foundation of King and Alfred Hitchcock, how did you transition into picking up a pencil and trying it yourself?
I wrote intermittently in my late teens and 20s. I never really did it because I was like, I'm going to be an author. I can't wait to write and publish. That just was never really a concern, and I never really thought about it that much. I think the first time I ever actually connected with a story in a way where I thought I would like to try to do something like this would be after reading The Hitchhiking Game by Milan Kundera, because it was just such an emotional gut punch of a story. I don't know, there was something about it. I think it's the first time where like a thematic undercurrent to a story really hit with me, where I was like, oh, I'm reading a story within a story.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm learning about these people by not learning about them. And I was maybe 17 or 18 when I read that. I think once that dawned on me reading that, I became more interested in stories, not just to be read, but kind of dissecting how they work and how they work at you in a broad sense, but also thematically, unconsciously, I guess you would say. So probably that.
And then you went to LA after college?
What I realized in college was I didn't need a film degree to go work in film. What I needed to do to work in film was to go work in film. And I did that for a while. I bounced around to some talent management agencies. I did work for Samuel French Inc. For a number of years while I was out there. You know, that was kind of, I guess, the first taste of actually working in publishing and seeing kind of the nuts and bolts of how some of that worked. I worked for Tim and Eric, awesome show. I worked for them for a little while. I worked for Asylum Films for a little while. I did some illustrations for early seasons of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I did a little bit of time as a reader on the Universal lot, and that was an experience. I had been writing a lot on the side. I ended up getting picked up by a producer based off of that screenplay, which led to an option, and then a third screenplay, which was bought outright by a director. And then everything just came to a screeching halt in 2008. That was the housing market crisis. And stuff just stopped. At the time, I had 2 features that were in various stages of pre-production. I was working on helping package a film for a management company, and literally like back to back to back, every one of these projects just died. And I was like, well, that was fun. It was hard not to become totally disillusioned. It was a brutal year to begin with. And then just to have 3 projects like that, just eat it one after another. It taught me really quickly that film wasn't going to be a satisfying experience, and that writing for committee was probably not what I wanted to do. if I was ever going to make any headway as a storyteller, it needed to be with stories. And it was probably that winter where I started going back and looking over earlier things that I had written for myself, basically, not with the intention of publishing or really showing anybody, just writing to write. And that ended up being published by a magazine, a little digest out of the UK called Morpheus Tales, I want to say is who picked that up. But that's been like 12 or 13 years at this point.
And now you're involved with publishing. You have a lot of oversight and control as opposed to,
Sure.
Hollywood writing by committee, as you say.
There's certainly a little bit of that. It's a matter of kind of wandering into things at the right time. I never intended to really get involved in publishing to any degree. And then Don was offered Rooster by the guy that originally owned the company. He called me one day and just said, hey, this guy wants to unload this company, but I don't want to do this unless you want to come along and do it. I was in a transitional point of my own at that time. So I was just like, sure, why not? I don't have anything going on. Let's run a publishing company. Naive, big, bright-eyed boys that we were 10 years ago.
Rooster Republic Press doesn't just throw stuff up on Kindle. You luxuriate in these, for lack of a better word, bespoke physical objects. And I've seen some of the things you've been putting out for October Animals. Not just the hardcover, which we could talk about in a minute, but the wooden cases, the art books, things like that. Yeah. Can you give us a little more detail about your approach?
Art was probably my first big love outside of, film and writing and whatnot. When we took over Rooster, one of my first big things out of the gate was we couldn't just be another small company putting things up on Amazon.com. I was not interested in doing it. But I knew it's always very precarious publishing. Even when you do it as close to the chest as Don and I do, we do so much of it in-house. Doing so much of it in-house is what allows us to put more focus on things like presentation. A lot of the indie stuff was a sea of paperbacks. And I knew how much, personally it would mean to me to see a book of mine in hardcover and just extrapolating from there. I knew it had to mean something to the authors as well that we were publishing. And so we figured out a way to at least offer hardcovers for indie debut. And the response to that has been really pretty positive. If it wasn't, we wouldn't keep doing it. A lot of the art takes a long time to do. Things like slipcases take a lot of time and effort and a lot of research and ruining a ton of wood before you ever get one that looks good. There's no reason why an indie release, even from a micro press in this day and age, can't look its absolute best.
So I am holding my copy of October Animals in hardcover.
Yeah.
And it is this slim hardcover with rich black and orange, and it has this incredible swirling gold embossed title. There are illustrations inside, and it's such a beautiful object. But if you're ready, I'd like to dive into the story itself.
Sure.
Just to get readers into the vibe, would you mind reading the opening for us?
And you just want that first paragraph.
Yeah, you can read as much or as little as you like.
We can record an audiobook. Risk existed in the collapsing space between lips, just before a kiss, and the banks of the Mischief River were a cemetery to all of the currents.
Thank you. That was
good?
perfect. Yeah. I wasn't quite sure what to make of the book, just in terms of categorizing it, because it felt like a parable, because it is ostensibly involving animal characters. You've got Lizzie Bat, owl, spider, cat, but It's surreal, like a slipstream sort of stream of consciousness, but it has these motifs and these rhythms of like an epic poem. There's rhythms and rhymes and these repeating patterns, and you have characters speaking things into existence. So it's like a song, it's a story, it's a parable, it's an ode to Halloween. It's
Right.
It's really sneaking something else under the dark waters of the Mischief River. I'm not even sure which direction to take this conversation because there's so much to get into. If I had to be very concise and boil it down, I might say it is Gaiman-esque.
Fair enough.
It's got parts Coraline, parts Mirror Mask, but it's also part Carnival of Souls.
When people ask what it's about, the easiest thing to do is just give them the log line and then set them off and be like, there you go. I actually didn't even bother with the log line until about a month before we started publicizing the book. It was a pain in the ass to write this book. There was just so much going on all the time. I have a problem where, because I've read so much and because I know quite a bit about genre and I know a lot about structure, you had to if you wanted to work in Los Angeles and be a screenplay reader. And every time I set out to write something, my brain absolutely refuses to allow it to become easily categorized, and I fight valiantly against structure, although there is a basic structure there. The final lines of October Animals were written probably a year or two before the rest of the book was written. So I knew where it was going, but life just kept getting in the way. I try to free write quite a bit in notebooks before I ever really commit something to a computer file. Anytime you're doing stuff like that, all of life that is sitting in the back of your head is going to start finding its way onto pages. Because I had just finished writing Grind Your Bones to Dust, which is funny. You mentioned October Animals being a parable. I had a friend of mine tell me it was like reading some sort of new fucked up Bible. That was kind of a hard book to write as well. Just a very heavy, heavy book. And I wanted to start working on a follow-up, another book, not a sequel or anything, just another book. But I knew that I needed to flush my system of Grind Your Bones to Dust. And I thought the easiest way to do that would be to start maybe a novella. I had sat down to start writing it on a Thursday. And then the next day, my father was dead. Mm. And this was in the middle of the pandemic on top of that. So then instead of working on the book, I got to drive 2,000 miles east to his house. And then I spent the next about month and change of my life going through every single thing that the man owned. Throwing away stuff, keeping some stuff. It was an ordeal, to say the least. It was a big mess, kind of a little bit of a mystery to sift through. And what was weird was you go through someone's home like that, and you can't help but just see this unfolding story of a person's life from all of this shit that they've accumulated for 40 to 50 years in this house. And so that kind of put me through the ringer. And he didn't die well either, which is a whole other thing. And so I had a spot of, I guess you would characterize it as a soft mental breakdown for probably about 9 months. And I did very little work, if any, on October Animals during that period of time. And the thing that kind of pulled me out of the morass was actually working on Haley Piper's book, Queen of Teeth. What that book did so well for me was that it was focused and tightly written. Haley understands genre, and she understands how to do cross-genre very well. And so being able to lose myself in somebody else's work, it was funny, I really felt like October Animals was going to be the palate cleanser, but it wasn't. It was Queen of Teeth. And it helped kind of get me back switched on in a creative mindset. I really felt at that point like, okay, I'm ready to sit down and actually commit some solid time to October Animals again. I had written so little at that point that it was basically starting from page 1 again. But then, there was the pandemic. There was the fact that we were having enormously dangerous, out of control wildfires in every direction from where we lived at the time. And people ask, like, what was it like living in Southern Oregon? And I tell people it was like living in a chimney. And suddenly I found myself having to homeschool a kid, which, I was not prepared in the least to do. So then we ended up deciding to be done living out west. We couldn't do another season of just 4 and 5 months of smoke and ash. Just could not do that anymore. So then we ended up coming back to Illinois. They say that, sometimes a change of scenery is what helps. And I will tell you, I wrote more of October Animals in probably the first 4 or 5 months of being here in this new house than I had written in the past 2 years. So I don't know. I mean, October Animals just became the offspring of all of these things that you cannot plan for. And so the book became, the narrative kind of became that as well. It's hard to make something that feels unmoored like October Animals may, while also having a fairly thorough outline for it. But that's how life felt for so long. It started becoming like an effort to capture that complete lack of control, for better lack of a word. And I feel like, if anything, that kind of comes through in the overall narrative for the book.
Did you always intend for it to be focused on Halloween?
Yes, it was always Halloween. Yeah.
There is a lovely line on page 78. Halloween spoke to a longing in everyone, to their deeply held desires and secrets. And Halloween begged for these desires and secrets to reveal themselves.
The more you read about Halloween, it's not dissimilar to reading about fiction structure, stories. And everything it's stories within stories within stories. There's an overwhelming effort to have stories be these self-contained things, but they really aren't. No story really ever is. And Halloween is a bit like that. I refer to a pharmacy as Bartholomew Fair. Bartholomew Fair is an old festival that they used to have in England, and it was right there at the end of summer, and it was kind of like a precursor to fall festivities and Halloween celebrations, and how what used to be these celebrations, existing before Halloween, but then as time goes on, it becomes kind of muddled, and what was Bartholomew Fair and things they may have done there become things that people do at Halloween celebrations. When you think about Halloween as a festival geared towards harvest season, as opposed to what Halloween is now, which is, now it's the candy holiday.
It's the sexy / political satire holiday.
But there you go. Again, like, it's just opening up like an onion. The more I was reading about Halloween, the more it's like trying to nail Jello to a tree. You look at Halloween and a history of Halloween, and it is just such a scattered thing. It's very hard to wrangle a true history of Halloween because there's so many different aspects of it. People are like that. Every person is a multitude, right?
By way of example, this episode is going to release on Walpurgisnacht.
Yes.
Walpurgisnacht is the eve of the feast of St. Walpurga, but it is also Hexanacht, Witch's Night, and it is also Beltane, which is the counterpart to Samhain. So it is halfway to Halloween. It is also a time when the veil between the living and the dead is thin.
Yes. The idea of thin places at certain times of year, even in this collective shared reality we all have, it's constantly full of thin spaces. And if it isn't ghosts, then it's people that you know, it's people that you think you know, it's people that have moved away or that you remember from years ago. It's the memories of people that have passed on. And they're constantly poking and prodding you and informing everything that goes on around you at all times. But it's always kind of there. And it was a way to present Halloween to people. There are plenty of monsters. Yes, there's ghosts and creepy things, but it isn't just that. It's funny. All Saints Day was a bigger holiday than Christmas was for ages and meant more to people. And it was a memorial to grief, essentially. And then, of course, with everything going on in my own life, there was just, I don't know if there was any other avenue it was going to take. The events in my own life really did begin to dictate how life happened for these characters in this book. And it became very necessary to kind of give the idea that Halloween is forever. And not just a holiday, but this idea of grief, of longing, of celebration, that it's always and it's all the time and everything is happening just constantly. There is no real end to it. Halloween as a holiday is hard to pin down. It has deep roots and they go all over the place.
And all the way down.
Yeah. Yep.
I think I'm going to discard with my sillier, typical Halloween questions about candy and costumes, things like that.
Hey, you're also more than welcome to ask the silliest questions possible.
And I do in most interviews. However, I want to give space and consideration to this angle on Halloween, which I adore and which resonates with me more with each passing year. And so I kind of want to leave it at that.
Sure, that's fine by me.
I usually ask people about local monsters or local legends.
Go a little bit further, I think northwest, the Piasa Bird, which was a big petroglyph of painting that had been on the bluffs, and Lewis and Clark make mention of it during the Lewis and Clark expedition. But while they were exploring that side of the river, they came across this huge painting on the bluffs, and these bluffs are fairly large. And there was a picture of, maybe it was a Piasa bird, they don't really know, because it ended up getting destroyed over time anyway, so they only have the descriptions that Lewis and Clark made. But there was a face on the cliffside, and there was this bird-like creature, probably some sort of what they think was maybe like a water deity of some kind, with like the head almost of like maybe what looked like a cross between a lion or a dog, but it had a beard. It had elk or deer antlers. It had like a scaled body, some feet that looked almost like flippers. So it was kind of a chimerical creature. Over time, that was destroyed. The city of Alton, which is near where it was, commissioned a big mural to be painted of this creature. A pretty impressive painting all on its own, especially if you're a young kid growing up in the area and you're interested in monsters, to be driving up this beautiful scenic river road along the Mississippi and see a 30-foot long dragon basically up on the cliffside. And that's where I grew up. So I grew up with monsters. October, Illinois is basically all in Illinois.
Mm.
Riverside town right off the bluffs. The fireworks that they're watching are fireworks that I watched at the edge of the Mississippi when I was a kid. The park they walk through is the old shitty, dusty gravel parking lot that everybody in town parked in when they wanted to go see the fireworks. None of that stuff's there anymore. It's all gone. It's been developed.
Mm.
Alton was a weird place to grow up. There's a lot of history there, a lot of ghosts, a lot of monsters. It's all there if you want to look beneath the surface of the place.
A perfect setting for October animals.
Yeah.
Where can our listeners find more of your stuff?
At the End of the Day, I Burst into Flames was just re-released recently. We're distributing that through Ingram. It's also up at Amazon, so you can get it from big box retail. You can probably get it from a library. You can definitely get it online. I'm fairly certain that most online retailers can carry it. October Animals, we're selling that directly through roosterrepublic.com in hardcover. But on the 30th, the paperback should be available again through most major retailers. If they don't carry it on the shelves, you can always ask them to order it, or just go online. It'll be at one of the sites. Grind Your Bones to Dust will probably be up sometime in the next about month and a half. Again, that'll be through Ingram, so major retailers and online.
Well, thanks for hanging out, and thanks for a more introspective look of Halloween than I normally get a chance to do, but one that I really appreciate.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick. And just as a personal note, I lost my father on Friday.
Oh.
It kind of hit me just as I was diving into October Animals, so I just want you to know that I see you, and I appreciate the book. It really meant a lot to me.
My sincerest condolences to you and yours.
Thanks, Nick.
Take care.
Have a good one.
You too.